Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be talking about the IFC film Four Samosas. We are joined today by writer and director Ravi Kapoor and producer and actor Venk Potula. And Ravi, I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the way in which you wanted to tell this story. I've heard you say that you really see heist movies as relationship movies because it's so much about bringing people together and creating this camaraderie. And so with that in mind, and the way that you've told this story with Vinny at the center as a character, I was interested in how that influenced a lot of your choices in the writing and directing of this film.
Yeah, I always also wanted to make a really quirky kind of heist movie as well, where we didn't have any guns or car chases or fancy gadgets. Something what we call a lo-fi heist movie. So I'd always been interested in trying to figure out how that would work and figuring out if there was a way to kind of mess with the conventions of the heist story as well, and just kind of subvert them a little bit and find more funny, unconventional, kind of quirky ways of telling the same story, but in a completely different way. And Venk was somebody who I wrote the film with in mind because I thought he'd be the perfect lead for a film about a group of outsiders who are doing a heist, and all of them should never be doing a heist. They're completely ill-equipped.
Ill-equipped. I love that. And Venk, I've heard you say that one of the things that really drew you into the character when you read the script was just a lot of his vulnerability and fragility as a character. He's so stagnated in terms of there's so many things that he wants to do in the world and in his life, but it's almost like the fear is crippling to this point of just not being able to move forward, in his romantic life, in certain friendships, professionally, in his idea for his music career. And so as you were starting to shape the idea of how you wanted to capture him and portray him, how did that driving force of making sure that the vulnerability was such a driving force become a foundation for you?
I mean, I think it's a great question. And I feel that it was really about leaning in. That's what spoke to me when I read Vinny for the first time. It was that, oh, wow, this guy is really insecure. And he's also just, I really resonated with that feeling of wanting, because I don't feel that, he says in the beginning that he wants to take on the world. And so there's that feeling of wanting to change yourself, but somehow knowing that you can't, or there's something blocking you. And I think it's very different from being in a place where you've completely rejected any idea of being vulnerable and trying to put yourself out there. He is rapping of a kind in the beginning of the film. And so it's not that he's doing nothing per se, but he hasn't quite. We often talk about this film being a message about finding your voice and finding your community. And I think that little block, I think a lot of us go through is something similar, whether you're creative or whether you're not, or whatever you might be pursuing. And so for me in my own life, I felt that way. And so I just instantly locked it. I was like, I just know who this guy is and what he's going through. And of course, knowing that the character it's always inspired by, I guess, my own life was, I guess in conversations that we might have shared, was also an honor really to see that manifested in the character. And so I just knew that if we could get the chance to tell this story, then I could really bring something to this guy that I don't know if anyone else would have found.
I love that. Sorry.
And I was just going to say, I think the other thing about Vinny as well, and Venk talks about it too, is this idea of it's just about putting it out there as well. It's like he is rapping at the beginning. He is trying things. He's creating and making stuff, but he's not putting it out and saying, here you go, knock me down or build me up, do whatever you want with me, but for better or worse, here I am. In some ways, he's scared of that, making that final step of going, I'm going to put myself out in the town square and be ready to have the crap thrown at me or not. Hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not. Exactly.
And for both of you in finding that kind of narrative momentum for him as a character as to where is the tipping point going to come of when he finally feels confident enough in himself to make more actions and to move forward in different ways and come up with a heist with a whole group of friends. Did you find it fairly organically in terms of just like the first act of the film building up to that place of, okay, now he's actually going to do something rather than projecting and talking about the idea?
Yeah, I think it was always, we were reaching for the end of that first act as the place where he goes, okay, now I'm going to do something. But that something is a heist, and that's a misplaced energy in some ways. It's not the right thing to be done. So it's later on that he kind of discovers that the thing he really should be doing, which is telling the woman that he loves her in the most open and authentic and honest way he possibly can. He doesn't realize until later in the film, and that, like, at the end of the third act. I was put my films in 4 acts. So yeah, but definitely we wanted to kind of get him going on that journey of making the misplaced attempt to get the diamonds right at the cusp of the end of the first act.
And I think, just to go into it, because we're here, I feel there's an element to it that Vinny knows. I think he knows that this isn't right, and he has a conversation with the character that Ravi plays where he's like, I know this isn't right, but sometimes I feel we have that moment where we don't know whether something's going to work out, but we flock into something and just trust that even if this isn't right, it's going to lead us to where we need to go. And I think that's what ends up. He doesn't realize it necessarily, but I think instinctually, kind of on that subconscious level, this heist is something to get to where he knows he wants to go at the end of the day.
And sorry. No, I was just going to say, and just to keep going with that metaphor as well, I went on a hike today, and I was going, first you go up the street and it says dead end. And you go, oh, in normal circumstances, you go, oh, this is a dead end. It's going to lead nowhere. But then you get on the little trail that goes on this beautiful hike. And in some ways, that's what happens with Vinny. Really, the heist should be a dead end, but it leads up into this beautiful place of realization and self-discovery.
That's so great. Because you were both mentioning as well, his music in the film, and the rapping at the beginning is very different to the musical performance that he gives at the end, in part because that's also him collaborating with other people that he's built these friendships and this whole group dynamic with. And so how did you set about finding collectively what is his voice as a musician, as an artist? What are the things that he wants to say through the lyrics that he's writing for himself? And how is that going to evolve from the beginning to the end of the film?
I mean, it was, in some ways, it was kind of like, he's beginning in the beginning of the film. He's beginning as a rapper, and he's trying to write pure rap in some ways and be a hip hop artist. And I think by the end, it was kind of like trying to figure out what's almost the opposite. It's not the complete opposite to what he's beginning at the end, but it's definitely a completely different feel. And in some ways, it's a very cheesy, ultra kind of cheesy love story or song that he performs at the very end. And it's so vulnerable, and so in some ways it's so simplistic that you can't help but kind of fall in love with his honesty in the way he was telling the story and declaring his love as well. So it's trying to find that real contrast, I think, between the hip hop and something a lot more vulnerable.
I think too, in creative pursuits, we're always trying to think of what's the idea of what we want versus who we are. And I think that's where we are at the beginning of this thing, where he's trying to be in something that isn't him, but thinks that's the version of himself he should be. And it's scarier to kind of go in and deeper and do the cheesy thing, do the thing that, would be considered quote unquote bad by rap standards, let's say, right? But it's still him. It's him. And I think that's what we are all trying to get to, that place where we feel that and that's part of the thing, whether you put it out there, whether people like it or not, but if it feels like it's you, then you can't lose at the, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. We're all trying to get to the cheese. We're trying to get to our inner cheese is where we're all reaching for.
We're all corny, aren't we?
Yeah.
He's also a character who right from the get-go has such an infectious energy, even just those opening scenes where he's rolling across the store to his co-worker and is talking to her in conversation, and she's never even responding to anything, and he's holding a one-man conversation, but it's super engaging to listen to. And then he's like, do you want to hear my latest lyrics? Like, this is what I've been working on. And so how did you want to set about really just like bringing the audience like straight in at the beginning of the film and finding that really infectious charisma and energy that he has? Because obviously that then comes into play later in the film as to why everybody wants to rally around him and be part of this heist with him.
Venk.
Oh God. Well, I mean, for me, it's in it's there in the way he was written. There is this element of, I mean, with that conversation, particularly in the beginning with Pushpa, I think he does sort of, it is sort of a one-man show, but he has a relationship with her. And we talked a lot about how this is a thing for them, right? This isn't the first time, like this is just how they talk. And I think in some ways, maybe Vinny understands people. I don't know, because he is able to kind of appeal to everyone's seeming needs, even if it's for his own gain, selfish gain in the beginning. He is in some ways thinking about other people, like, hey, maybe you could go to Bollywood, to his friend Zach. And I think he does genuinely believe that he is talented and could do those things. So for me, when I read the character, it was all genuine, even if it was also a little selfish. And I think we don't see that often, about genuinely being selfish in like, that wasn't the right mix, but if that makes sense, I think it all came from a good place, even though it was self-serving.
And for you, Ravi?
Yeah, I think, like Venk says, I think there's a vulnerability about the character that I think is really appealing, and the way Venk plays the character as well is very charming. Despite the fact that he's a little bit of a malcontent, and he can be selfish and annoying as well. I think Venk brings such a charm to the character as well that you can't help but kind of go along with this journey and fall in love with him and go, oh, okay, go on then, steal it, do it. And we'll come with you. You're an idiot, but we'll come with you. And I think in some ways that enthusiasm that he has for it is what brings these other people on board as well. But I think also those other people kind of recognize themselves in him as well. They recognize the outsider-ish, the outsider nature. I don't know what the word is. The Venk has, or Vinny has, in themselves as well. So it's I think it becomes a point of connection between all the characters too.
Absolutely. And Venk, there's something that you've mentioned in terms of how you approach this character as well, and that the film is a comedy and has a lot of comedic elements, but that it was important for you and your character to not play to the comedy, because for him the emotional stakes are really high. They're all very real. His life hangs in the balance of if he can muster it together to tell the woman that he loves her, and that's gonna spawn wherever his life is going in the next few years. And so how did you want to go into this kind of very aware of a lot of the comedic beats that are written into the script that were in performances in the film, and yet also not being the person to kind of play to landing on the beats in specific ways?
It's really interesting because I've been acting for a long time and I've done a lot of comedy, and that tends to be where people put me. But I remember I went to UCLA and studied acting there. And I remember doing a scene from like Henry the like Hotspur, and I think it was Henry IV Part 1, and it was a dramatic scene. But when I did that scene, it ended up being a comedy, and I promise you, I wasn't trying to play for the joke. And it's been a lot of, and then I would think, like, I don't understand. What am I not getting? And sometimes I feel like I'm not in on my own joke, if that makes sense. And Ravi's laughing because he knows it's true. And I think I'm getting better at it the older I'm getting, but I'm not quite there yet. And so a part of me knew that with this character, it was actually a relief to not have to play the joke, because I knew that the comedy would come naturally through me just because it's just there in me. I don't know. It's hard to teach it, I always feel. And I've always had it, whether for better or for worse, truthfully. So I just knew, okay, well, but the thing I can do is play the emotional stakes and really be this person. And the challenge, like you mentioned, was trying to find the emotional core, which is that he's heartbroken, and he wants to feel like he can belong to something. He feels like he's on the fringes, and on the outside he's lonely, basically. So that was always the thing I was actually trying to bring into the scene. And I knew that Ravi and the other cast, they're going to bring the comedy. And even if people don't see that completely, because it is a comedy and there was all that, I guess I just trusted that the seed of that might show up in a scene or two, and we would get it just through the through the osmosis of the movie.
And Ravi, as you were writing the script and coming up with a lot of the narrative beats of how are they going to try and achieve what their goal is, how did you set about figuring out a narrative that worked in terms of what is attainable for this group that are trying to pull off this heist. So it's completely believable that they would think to put costumes on and hide in the grocery store and wait till after hours and be in the bathroom and, you know, stand on the bathroom stall. But also it's completely believable that they wouldn't be able to figure out how to actually break into the safe once they get into that room. And, you know, so what are they going to try then? And so how did you find that balance of, you know, we want to have these kind of like high stakes, we want to have comedic elements, but we always want to feel like the audience believes that this is a very real, true scenario for these particular characters in this world?
Yeah, I think it was always about trying to set up from the beginning the tone of the film in terms of and the reality of the world that we were living in as well, which is a heightened reality. It's not a reality that we know. These people do live in almost like a parallel universe of Artesia's Little India, and they are in some ways they're clowns. It's a clown piece to some degrees, and I felt as long as we kind of set up that at the beginning in terms of this world that we're living in and these people who they are, that they are not quite real, that the audience would kind of come along and buy into the journey and the particular predicaments that they find themselves in as they're trying to pull off this heist. They will get that the engineer is not really a very good engineer at all and really doesn't know what she's doing and is really more interested in eating the snacks. So I just kind of felt if we set up everything right at the beginning in terms of the world we were living in, the audience would come along with that. But it's always a balance, because you don't want to kick the audience out too much where they just go, this is so ridiculous, even in the world that you've created. So it was always trying to figure out, have we set it up enough? Have we set up the expectations up in the right way?
And with what you were saying there as well about finding the voice of the movie tonally, it also feels like a movie that really is paying homage in a lot to a lot of kind of like 80s and 90s movies in that style, with the aspects that feel more heightened, you know, even just going down to the fact that there's these challenges and there's this challenge off, but actually, you know, Vinny's group are naturally better at talking in a debate because they have someone who will just talk for hours and hours and hours on end, ultimately winning. And so when it came to things like creating a montage sequence that, you know, in one movie could have been Rocky running up the stairs, but in this is the different challenges and tasks that they're doing. How did you find those little beats and how you wanted these characters in this world to really pay homage to the genre at the same time?
You know, a lot of that was about trying to discover what the characters' superpowers were and how do they each contribute towards making this heist possible, and whether they succeed or don't succeed. It was trying to figure out what is it that they have that they can, that nobody else in the group or even in this little world they live in might possess. So a lot of it was trying to figure that out, and then just also kind of living in the environment of a little India as well, of going, what's specific about this place that we can play with as well? Who are the other people that they come into contact with, and therefore what are the situations that develop out of that as well? So it's trying to figure out how we can use this unique world where we were setting a heist, because I don't know a movie set in a little India in America, where a heist movie before that has been done specifically, not off the top of my head. So I felt like, oh, this is kind of partly what makes this film unique, is the world we're living in as well.
That's so great. And Venk, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the relationship that you had with the camera, because even the aspect ratio of how the movie is filmed brings us in very close to you, the other characters in your performance. And there's a lot of moments where instead of the camera being on a 2-shot for conversations, it's in a close-up as you're in conversation with someone else, or the camera is moving between 3 of you, depending on who's talking within a scene. And so what was that relationship that you ended up having in terms of the dynamic of your performance and the camera, given that it is so close to you so much of the film?
Yeah, you got to get comfortable, huh? Yeah, you gotta kind of let go of any ideas of being self-conscious, which, to be fair, I had done a long time ago. You know, I often say I don't have any shame. But I think the biggest challenge with that was, it's like any movie set, right? It's like there's always stuff going on that's never convenient for you as an actor to be able to do what you need to do, but that's the job. It doesn't matter. You put the camera over, you put the camera over there, and it could be a bunch of things happening, but my job is to do what I have to do to play this character and tell the story in the role that I have. So, you know, I mean, I can say it's what a big part of it was looking at a lot of tape and acting to tape, and like having an actor be like slightly off. It's like if I'm looking at you, but I'm acting over here, but you're there. it's, it was that kind of stuff, because with that wide lens, you have to make sure the eye lens are all going to match. And but I wasn't really nervous about it. I guess I kind of felt as well, we talked earlier about the style of this thing being heightened, that let's lean into it. Like, we're not trying to make, I definitely had a moment where I was getting in my head about the acting in some ways, and the heightened acting style being very different from what you learn in a Meisner acting class, and that naturalistic Marlon Brando thing that everyone wants to do, and the Johnny Depp subtlety and whatnot. This is not that, right? And it had to be one of those things of leaning into that and letting go of, this is not the right acting style. And that is a skill in of itself. So I think at that point, I kind of leaned into it and said, you could put the camera right here. We're going to make this movie, like, put it wherever you want. Let's do it.
I love that. Once you allowed yourself to lean into those heightened aspects in terms of what it required from your performance, like you were saying, it is such a specific skill set. Did you find the line of where you wanted to carry that to, and where you felt like you could push that to, where it still felt very emotionally grounded fairly early on? Or was it a little bit of trial and error in some of the early scenes for you?
I'm laughing because I will say this. Whatever I thought was big was never what Ravi thought was big. So when I say big, I mean in terms of matching the style. So there were definitely many times where it was the back and forth of Ravi being like, you could go for it, man. Go for it. And I'd be like, I feel like I'm going for it, man. I feel like, he's like, well, you really go for it. I'm like, all right, I got you. And then at that point, it was just like, okay, let me just like lean into this style. If I was leaning into it, I thought 100%, I was doing it. It was about going 250%. Again, the challenge was trying to keep it, because for me, I wanted to not lose. I didn't want to pop the balloon, if that makes sense, the emotional air balloon, and then pop, and then it's all out. And then it doesn't feel like it's full. It just feels empty. And I never wanted that to ever happen. So that's why I think we had to find that balance. And Ravi, you can speak about how far are we going to go, and which take and which scene, and then trusting Ravi to be like, you know what, let's just go for it in this one. And if the balloon pops, then screw it. It's fine. Maybe it's just what I think, and that's not going to come across to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of piggyback on what Venk was saying, I think this particular kind of performance style, it requires you to be rooted in something real, and it requires you to be rooted in something emotional as well. And then the more rooted it is, the bigger you can go, I think. But if you're not quite rooted in it, and you're not really hanging on to a core, if anything, then it just becomes fluff in some ways. And Venk did a great job, I think, of really rooting into the emotional core of the character, which allowed him then to go as big as we needed him to go, because it was always connected to something.
Absolutely. And for you in directing this film as well, what was kind of the genesis moment of, I want to use the wide lens, I really want to come in close, and coming up with a lot of that cinematic language that you've used with the camera to really lean into the tone and the voice of the film?
I'd done it a little bit with some of my short films in the past as well. There was one short film where we just used one wide angle lens for every shot. So wide shots, close-ups, everything, and which is what we did with this film as well. We only used one lens, except for a couple of fantasy moments. So the desire was always to kind of really push the visuals on this and find a way to make it as defined as we possibly could as a film. And there were definitely some influences in terms of movies like Delicatessen is a movie that I love, and it's a kind of very clown theater based kind of movie as well. And there's a lot of wide angle lenses in there too. And then the 4x3, it was about, and we do these curved corners, was about trying to create a retro feel for the movie as well. So it felt like it was from another time, that it was almost like a home movie on steroids. So there was and also we always chose never to shoot over the shoulder shots and just shoot everything inside. So we kind of gave ourselves a lot of limitations to free us creatively in a weird way. And I think it allowed us to create something very, very specific on a visual style. And even in the edit, when we got in the edit, it was like, let's always, whenever anybody is talking, let's always be on them. Let's never have lines off camera. And again, that's about creating a very defined editorial style for the film as well. And I think it's because, you know, we're not a high budget movie. We're quite the opposite. And it was about how can we use that to our advantage? How can we not try and be slick and actually be lo-fi cool?
I love those details in it, and it really adds to the way that you've told this story. And it was such an enjoyable film to watch. So congratulations on everything with the film and its upcoming release. And thank you so much to both of you for talking about it. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Really appreciate it,
Thanks
Mara.
for having us.